The myth of the Lamassu. In Mesopotamian folklore, the Lamassu was an incredible beast. It had the head of a human, the wings of an eagle, and the hybrid body of a bull mixed with a lion. These ferocious monstrosities once protected the wealthy cities of early civilization. They were symbols of a king's authority. They also symbolized protection against the king's enemies. But could the Lamassu have been real, or at least based on something real? Throughout Mesopotamian art and mythology, the Lamassu appeared as a celestial being. Sometimes it was depicted as a female deity, other times it was more masculine. The creature has been associated with Inara, the Hittite goddess of wild animals, similar to the Greek goddess Artemis. In the Akkadian period, Lamassu were tied to the messenger god, Ccile. In all of the stories, Lamassu are closely linked to gods and powers from the heavens. The first recorded mention of such a creature comes from 3000 BC, or 5,000 years ago. Countless images of Lamassu have been found in ruins across Mesopotamia. There have also been a few colossal Lamassu statues excavated at old Assyrian capitals, and in Nimrud and Dur-Sharrukin. The point I'm trying to make is that these creatures were everywhere in Mesopotamia. Even Ezekiel wrote about the Lamassu in the Bible. Were they mythical guardians, or did ancient people really see celestial monsters descend from the heavens with the gods? The ancient mysteries of the New Year. What better way to start the new year than by digging into the mystery of ancient New Year's Eve celebrations? To do that, I have to take you back 4,000 years to the early days of Babylon. Babylonians were the first people that historians know about who celebrated the arrival of the new year. For them, the start of the year was a little different from ours today. It didn't come on January 1st. The Babylonians believed the new year started on the first fresh new moon after the vernal equinox. The vernal equinox comes in late March, when sunlight and darkness lay an even measure over the world. When there's the same amount of sunlight as darkness, the Babylonians hailed the beginning of the new year with an epic festival called Atiku. Atiku was more than just the celebration of a new year to look forward to. It was also a commemoration of Marduk, the sky god, and his victory over the evil goddess of the seas, Tiamat. This was the time of the year when new kings were crowned and when rulers would deliver their divine mandates for the upcoming months. As civilization advanced, humans in different societies came up with new ways to celebrate the new year, though civilizations still preferred to connect the new year with an agricultural or celestial event, or sometimes both, like in Egypt, where the year began with the annual flooding of the Nile and the rise of the star Sirius. But when did people start celebrating New Year's Day on January 1st? It began, as so many things did, with the Romans. According to legend, the original founder of Rome, the great Romulus, created the earliest Roman calendar in the 8th century BC. The calendar had 10 months and a total of 305 days. Over the centuries, the calendar started to be an issue. It fell out of sync with the sun because it was missing 61 days. It was Julius Caesar who solved this problem by gathering all the greatest astronomers in the realm and figuring out the true length of the year. Caesar then instituted the Julian calendar, which was much more accurate. He also officially changed New Year's Day to January 1st. Well, to Januarius 1st, as it was called then. As for the New Year's Eve celebrations in Rome, they would have looked very similar to celebrations today. Historical texts tell us that Romans celebrated by offering great sacrifices to Janus, the Roman god of beginnings. Janus is where the month January comes from. Romans also decorated their homes with laurel branches, held epic parties, and exchanged gifts. What do you think? Do you like having New Year's in January, or do you think we should change it to March for the springtime? Let me know in the comments below. The Vanishing Inventor. William Cantello was a very unusual individual in the 19th century. He created fantastic inventions that propelled him to fame. He was particularly good at inventing new, devastating pieces of weaponry. However, he suddenly disappeared one day. After his disappearance, a man with a shady past known as Sir Hiram Maxim suddenly showed up and started inventing guns. When you look at photographs of the two men side by side, they are almost identical. Let's start with William's early life before delving into the possibility of his reincarnation as another man. William Cantello was born in 1838 on the Isle of Wight. Early in life, he was recognized as a gifted engineer with a mind for innovation. He became a landlord and owned his own shop. William toiled long hours in his creepy underground laboratory. The few people who were allowed into his subterranean workshop described strange light machines, humming globes, and what looked like futuristic weapons. When William had children, they too became engineers. The whole family became weird and secretive and reclusive. They worked hard on their inventions, though they kept most of their creations a secret. Then, in late 1880, William Cantello disappeared. A substantial sum of money was missing from the family account, and despite their best efforts, William could not be found. The year after William disappeared, an American inventor named Hiram Stevens Maxim arrived in the UK. Maxim brought some exceptional inventions with him to the British Isles. One of the inventions was the world's first portable and fully automatic machine gun. It was called the Maxim gun. Perhaps you heard of it. Hiram Maxim also had some other inventions. He held patents for interesting new mechanical devices like mousetraps, steam pumps, and curling irons. He impressed the public with his extensive list of inventions and even claimed that he was the one who invented the light bulb. Hiram was strange in that he had no past. He simply showed up with all these inventions and had no proof of origin. When William Cantello's sons saw a photograph of the newly arrived inventor, they couldn't believe their eyes. William and Hiram looked identical. The sons became convinced that their father William was selling the family's inventions under the new name Hiram Maxim. Hiram also claimed that he had some knowledge of teleportation. Rumors started to spread that William had learned how to teleport himself, which he had done when he switched identities. Sadly, this mystery remains unsolved. Hiram died in November 1916 during World War I, while millions of people killed one another with his invention. The death of the Maya. One of the greatest mysteries in all of human history is the collapse of the Maya Empire. In recent years, scientists have been focusing on one main theory. It's a theory you've heard by now because it's being repeated constantly. Scientists say the Maya civilization collapsed 1,000 years ago because of drought. But what if that didn't happen? And scientists are totally wrong. The idea is that the Maya transformed their environment so much and destroyed so much of the jungle that they changed the very weather. The rain stopped falling, which led to a serious drought. The drought lasted for decades, wilting crops and causing mass starvation. People abandoned the great cities as they were overwhelmed with deaths and anarchy. But what about proof? Well, there is a substantial amount of it. There is evidence from the climatological record that shows prolonged droughts during the decline of the Maya civilization. This was during the 9th and 10th centuries AD. Evidence on the ground proves there was also widespread deforestation, which made the drought even worse. No trees equals less rain. Cultivating more land to feed a growing population likely did reduce the amount of rainfall in southern Mexico and Guatemala. Everything scientists are saying about the Maya-induced climate change is realistic and mostly proven. There were indeed environmental consequences that could have potentially wiped out the Maya, but not everyone agrees. Archaeologist Scott Feddick from the University of California, along with his colleague, plant physiologist Luis Santiago, have proposed something different. They believe the Maya civilization would have easily survived a drought. After much research, the two scientists concluded the Maya had access to nearly 500 edible plants. Many of these plants would have been unaffected by a few years of drought. According to what they said in a recent press release, even in the most extreme drought situation, there is no evidence the Maya would have run out of food. They still would have had, in the worst-case scenario, 59 edible species of plants. Plants such as chaya, a shrub that is still eaten by descendants of the Maya today. Its leaves are extremely high in iron, potassium, and calcium. Scott and Lewis say the chaya shrub would have provided an excellent amount of nutrition for the Maya during drought. And that's only one plant. So, if the Maya didn't starve to death, what really happened? Scott and Lewis don't have a definitive answer. They don't know why people began abandoning Maya cities around the year 900, but they do know that drought is more than likely an oversimplification of something much more mysterious. The secrets of the pyramids. The Great Pyramid of Giza was built 4,500 years ago. It was the tallest building in the world for approximately 3,871 years, looming 481 feet above the desert sand. It took 2.3 million blocks of stone to build the pyramid. Scientists are still struggling to understand the precise construction methods used to complete the world wonder. But that's not all scientists are struggling to understand. There are countless wild theories about why the Great Pyramid was built. Many people believe it was a beacon for capturing signals from far away in space. Some have claimed it was used as a giant battery to store energy and power extraterrestrial machines. But the boring and disappointing truth is that it was built in 2550 BC by a human ruler named Pharaoh Khufu. It was built to be his burial tomb, the king's final resting place. It was his son who built the second and slightly smaller pyramid in 2520 BC. Then it was Pharaoh Menkaure in 2490 who built the third and even smaller pyramid. There are still some mysteries that scientists haven't been able to solve. There are empty pockets inside the pyramid that nobody knows anything about. Hollow chambers that seem to serve no purpose, but surely must have been important when they were built. There is also the fact that nothing was found inside the Great Pyramid, only a few pieces of wood. Then there's the mystery of what lies beneath the pyramids. According to Greek author Herodotus from 2,500 years ago, the pyramids are standing on a buried labyrinth. Herodotus wrote that the labyrinth underneath the pyramids is even more impressive than the structures above it. It had 3,000 chambers and burial vaults for kings. The historian claimed to have seen the upper layers of the labyrinth with his own 2 eyes, but was forbidden from venturing into the deeper passages below ground. At some point in antiquity, the Great Labyrinth was either destroyed or completely buried. People have been looking for an entrance to the labyrinth since the 17th century, but have had no luck. It might be nothing but a myth, but it might also be the greatest potential discovery in Egypt that hasn't been made yet. Do you think there is a labyrinth beneath the pyramids in Egypt? Let me know in the comments. The Twin Peaks Cold Case. In 1908, an unsolved homicide sent shivers up the spines of New Yorkers. It was such a brutal and baffling case that almost 100 years later, it inspired the story of Laura Palmer in the famous series Twin Peaks. It's been well over a century now, and the horrible killing of Hazel Drew is still an unsolved mystery. Hazel Drew died on July 7, 1908. 4 days after her death, investigators discovered her body floating in a pond. The deeper police delved into the case, the weirder the mystery became. Hazel came from a very poor family. At the age of 14, she worked as a domestic servant for a trio of wealthy men in Troy, New York. The men she worked for were wildly powerful and connected to top political players in the area. 2 of them even ran for mayor, and 1 was the city engineer. Days before Hazel was discovered dead, she had unexpectedly quit her job. It was extremely unexpected, and her closest friends were shocked to find out she had quit. Hazel's employers were prime suspects. 2 of them had been involved in scandals during her time employed. It was believed she may have seen or heard something that compromised one of the men she worked for, putting Hazel in danger. But there were some other suspects as well. There was a teen farmhand who had an unhealthy crush on young Hazel, and she had a creepy old uncle who was also obsessed with her. It was like a real-life game of Clue that the police were helpless to solve. Hazel was last seen shortly after she quit her job at the train station. A friend asked where she was going, and Hazel said she was heading down the river. But the only train leaving the station at that time was heading north to Albany. The next time Hazel was seen, she was dead in the water, wearing the same clothes that she was wearing at the train station. When the police questioned her family, they claimed Hazel was a shy and quiet girl who never went out with boys. But then, during the investigation, the police found a series of letters from a handful of admirers that told a different story. In one letter, a man named Harry apologized for accidentally bruising Hazel's wrist during an intimate encounter. Nobody knows who killed Hazel Drew or why, and nobody knows who she really was. The 20-year-old woman lived a life of secrets and shadows. Very Agatha Christie. Aliens and Nazis. In the year 1871, a politician and creative writer named Edward Lytton wrote a book. Well, it was more of a novella, a small fictional narrative called Vril, The Power of the Coming Race. Perhaps you've heard passages from the book in daily life and not even known it. The book was responsible for the phrase, "The pen is mightier than the sword." The book also opens with the famous line, "It was a dark and stormy night." But it's the contents of the novella that are most important of all. The book is narrated by an American who accidentally stumbles onto a race of underground people. The underground race are descendants of a group known as the Aryans. The Aryans were a powerful race of humans from ancient times who had learned how to harness a source of power called Vril. The power of the Vril allowed the Aryans to establish a utopia beneath the surface world. The Aryans lived in peace and harmony, with no war and no class. They had erased all the imperfections of humanity. If all of this sounds familiar, it's because the Aryan race and the power of Vril is straight out of Nazi ideology. But this book came out way before the rise of Hitler and World War II. What many people don't realize is that this small novella, a simple storybook, spawned a myth that spread across Europe like wildfire. Victorian mystics were raving about the power of Vril as if it were real. By the time Hitler came to power, plenty of folks had heard about the Aryan race, including Hitler himself and the German cults who supported him. The Vril Society was supposedly active in Europe at the start of World War II. There is a theory that says the Vril Society, a group of crazy people obsessed with the idea of Aryans and Vril energy, were responsible for getting the Nazis into power. There has never been any definitive proof that the Vril Society had any major influence over European politics. Most mainstream historians won't even admit the Vril Society was real, which leads me to the unsolved mystery of Maria Orsic. Maria was a medium who became the leader of the Vril Society and obtained extraterrestrial technology for the Germans. But I have to say as a disclaimer that nobody really thinks this is true. There are no reliable records to prove her existence. Instead, the first mention of her comes from a German book written in 1967. Maria supposedly became involved in the German national movement that swept the nation after World War I. In 1919, Maria moved to Munich and became a part of the Tula Society, another of Germany's weird cults before World War II. Maria had an uncanny ability to glimpse the future. With her incredible beauty and unique abilities, she broke away from the Tula Society and formed the Vril Society. Using her powers and the powers of other women she brought into the society, Maria had a vision. She supposedly received telepathic messages from somewhere called Aldebaran, located 68 light-years away in the distant Taurus constellation. The aliens gave Maria the information needed to build a spaceship. Maria handed this information over to the Germans, who tried to make a prototype. None of this has ever been verified, but here's what the legend says. The Germans continuously tested prototypes of the Vril Society's flying machine until 1944. That was when they had great success. The Germans supposedly launched a machine capable of space travel. After that, Maria Orsic and the Vril Society were never heard from again. Many believe the German mystics fled across the universe to Aldebaran. Scottish Templars. The Knights Templar were not just guardians of the Holy Land and fighters of the Crusades, they were also some of the most politically important people in the British Isles. The Templars played a major role in medieval Scotland, though what exactly they did in Scotland is a mystery. Many experts agree the greatest secrets of the Templars are lost in the quiet moors and misty lochs of the Scottish countryside. The Templars in Britain got their start thanks to King Henry I in 1128. King Henry met with a relatively unimportant person at the time, Hugh of Paynes. Hugh was in charge of an up-and-coming organization known as the Knights Templar. Hugh asked permission for his benevolent order to preach in England. The king saw no problem with this, so Hugh of Paynes was given a letter of endorsement. The letter allowed the Templars to begin building a presence in England. 7 years later, and the Knights Templar were purchasing properties like a real estate mogul. They had headquarters in London and were gaining ground in other parts of England. The Templars used the wealth they had rapidly accumulated to purchase political influence influence and help out their Templar brothers in the East. The records of what the Templars were doing in Scotland are a lot less helpful because they don't really exist. An 1185 inquest into the Templar assets doesn't mention Scotland at all. Neither does a Templar inventory list from 1308. Despite Scotland not being mentioned, the Templars were definitely in Scotland. Hugh of Payne had introduced himself to King David of Scotland prior to David becoming king in 1128. History shows the King of Scotland and the ruler of the Templars had a close relationship. In 1312, all assets of the Order of the Temple were to be given over to the Knights Hospitallers. It was the final nail in the coffin for the Templar Order. However, rumor is the Templars were never fully defeated in Scotland. Instead, they became the Order of St. John and continued their work until 1553. There are still rumors today that some of the greatest treasures of the world were taken back to Scotland and buried. Treasures like the Holy Grail and the Ark of the Covenant. The tomb of the first emperor. Archaeologists might never open the tomb of China's first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, not only because they fear the tomb is full of booby traps, but because they don't want to disturb the peaceful rest of the great unifier. Even if you don't know his name, you've surely heard of Qin Shi Huang's burial place. His tomb is guarded by the legendary Terracotta Army. The army is made of thousands of beautiful sculptures to protect him in the afterlife. Qin Shi Huang ruled China from 221 until 210 BC, then was buried underneath what was originally an enormous pyramid-like structure. Qin Shi Huang did a lot for China. He founded the Qin dynasty, he began laying down a system of roads to connect his new empire, and created the Great Wall of China. He was so powerful and wealthy that he built himself an army of statues. To date, archaeologists have found about 8,000 life-size statues in the Terracotta Army. Statues of soldiers, horses, and even chariots. Quite a lot of work has been done at his tomb, but scientists have never dared open it. At the center of the immense mausoleum is the tomb itself, still sealed. The contents of Qin Shi Huang's resting place are a mystery that might never be solved. The Mushu. Earlier in the video, I talked about the Lamassu, the celestial guardian of ancient Mesopotamia. The Lamassu may or may not have been a real entity that came down from space with the elder gods of the Sumerians. But there was another bizarre creature I want to share with you now. It's called the Mushu. The Mushu, according to the myths of ancient Babylon, was an exceptionally thin dragon. It had a long, serpent-like neck. It also had a long tail, arms like those of a lion with ferocious claws, and eagle talons on the ends of its bird legs. It was a bizarre hybrid between a dragon, an eagle, a lion, and a snake. As one of the first known mythical creatures in human history, many believe the Mushu was the original dragon. Myth tells us the Mushu was the symbol of Marduk, the hero god of early Babylon. Marduk was the son of Enki and Damgalnuna, the primordial entities responsible for creating the earth and Mesopotamian lore. Marduk defeated the Mushu, making the ornery dragon his servant. The dragon became kind of like Marduk's loyal dog. It was even etched onto the Great Ishtar Gate, whose remains are at the Pergamon Museum in Berlin. The early images of Marduk and his loyal Mushu date to the days of King Nebuchadnezzar II, 2,500 years ago. The Babylonians were kind of obsessed with dragons. The goddess Tiamat was the ruler of the seas and also the primordial mother of dragons. But where did the Babylonians get the idea from? Because in India, they had very similar monsters. A monster called Vritra was a snake dragon described in the Vedas, a collection of Sanskrit poems. The Vikings decorated their ships with dragons. The Chinese continue to feature dragons just about everywhere you look today. In ancient times, it was believed that dragons were responsible for earthquakes and bad weather. Do you think dragons could have existed? Or at least a dragon-like creature responsible for all these myths and legends? Let me know in the comments. How did Stalin really die? It has been a very long time since Joseph Stalin died. The former leader of the Soviet Union succumbed to a cerebral hemorrhage on March 5, 1953. Although that's the official story, there is a lingering mystery surrounding his death. For more than 70 years, there have been theories of foul play and murder. At the time of his death, Joseph Stalin was 73 years old. He wasn't exactly in the greatest condition, and certainly no spring chicken. He had a series of strokes in 1945, so the cerebral hemorrhage, meaning bleeding on the brain, was not totally surprising. Stalin's health had been in decline for some time, with doctors warning him for at least 2 years prior to his death to take it easy. Instead of listening to his doctor, Stalin had the man arrested and charged for spying. All the evidence does seem to point to a natural death, but there are a few strange facts that have helped support the conspiracy theories. For example, there was never an official autopsy released. The arrest and prosecution of his personal physician was suspicious. Then there were the deaths and dismissals after Stalin died that point to a sudden power struggle. When you also take into consideration that pretty much everybody in the world was Stalin's enemy, there is definitely a chance he was assassinated. So, who are the suspects? One rumor is that Lavrentiy Beria, the leader of the Soviet secret police, poisoned Stalin to hasten his demise. After Stalin's death, Beria shot up through the ranks of the Soviet Union, but nobody benefited from Stalin's death more than Georgy Malenkov, who briefly succeeded Joseph Stalin. Do you think he died a natural death, or did somebody take him out to gain power? The Plitdown Scandal. The Plitdown Man scandal is one of the greatest scientific mishaps of the 20th century. Fake fossils were put forward as evidence of early human ancestors, but the fossils turned out to be a mixture of human and monkey bones. Now, new information has revealed the Plitdown Man may have really been the Plitdown Woman. In 1912, museum paleontologist Arthur Smith Woodward announced the discovery of some very interesting fossils in Sussex. He and amateur antiquarian Charles Dawson supposedly stumbled upon evolutionary connections between prehistoric apes and modern humans. They found what appeared to be a species with the jaw of an ape but the large brain case of a modern Homo sapiens. This was considered to be the missing link. The real missing link scientists have been lusting after for centuries. Just before Charles Dawson died in 1916, he claimed there was a second site with even more information. For 40 years, the study of anthropology was foiled. There were some initial doubts as to the authenticity of the Plitdown Man, but it took 4 decades for the scientific community to prove the missing link was a fake. In 2016, a group of forensic scientists decided to make a 3D model of the fake creature. With help from illustrator Cicero Moraes, the fake hominid was digitally visualized for the first time. Scientists scanned the mix of human, orangutan, and chimpanzee skull parts. Then they added skin, hair, and facial features. During the reconstruction, the team made a shocking realization. The person who had forged the alleged ape man had done so using female parts. The Mirage Universe. You have undoubtedly heard at some point or another that the universe is constantly expanding, but a controversial new study suggests that could be totally wrong. The expansion of the universe could be nothing but a mirage. According to mainstream scientists, the universe is expanding and has been expanding ever since its birth just over 13 billion years ago. Scientists claim to know this because of something called redshift. Redshift is the stretching of light as an object moves farther away in the vastness of space. From where we are on Earth, scientists can observe the stretching of light to see that all distant stars and galaxies are moving further and further away. Not only that, but the redshift seems to indicate the universe is expanding faster and faster. This is something called the cosmological constant. The cosmological constant has been a big issue for scientists. It's only a theory because the way it works isn't understood. Scientists can't seem to find mathematical formulas to make sense of the increasingly fast expansion of the universe. They are always trying to propose new particles or forces of physics to make it work. But the cosmological constant continues to be an impossible problem. Professor Lucas Lombreiser from the University of Geneva has suggested something controversial in his new study. He believes there is no cosmological constant. The universe isn't expanding, it's flat and stable, just like Einstein originally theorized. Lombreiser's new work has also shown that there is no dark matter in the universe. Scientists have been saying for years that dark matter, a force that nobody's ever measured or proven as real, is responsible for expanding the universe in all directions. But if the universe isn't expanding, there is no dark matter. It doesn't even exist. At the end of the day, all these studies do is prove how little we understand the world beyond our planet. Who was Moses? We've all heard the story of Moses. He led God's chosen people out of Egypt by parting the Red Sea and escaping into the desert for 40 years. But who was Moses really? Historically speaking, without taking into consideration the Bible, was he a real historical figure? One theory is that Moses was a real Egyptian prince who fled when his brother seized power for himself. Prince Thutmose was in line to rule Egypt right behind his father Amenhotep III, aka Amenhotep the Magnificent, aka Amenhotep the Great. He ruled Egypt between 1386 and 1349 BC, following the death of his father, Thutmose IV. When Thutmose III died, his son Amenhotep IV seized power. Then he changed his name to Akhenaten. Following Akhenaten's death, King Tutankhamun would take over Egypt. Then there was Thutmose III, whose name disappeared from the history books between the death of his father and his younger brother taking the throne. Historians have always wondered what happened to him. Did he die? Was he killed by his younger brother to clear his path to the throne? Or did he lead his followers out of Egypt and travel across the Red Sea? The proof is in the language. In ancient Egypt, the word for son was Mos, and in Greek, the word turns into Moses. Moses pretty much means son. Some historians have suggested that Thutmose feared for his life because his brother was plotting his demise. Thutmose snuck away, taking a band of followers with him, and his name changed to Moses. Then, somehow, he became a prophet of God and earned immortality in the Bible. There is another theory as well. Author Sigmund Freud once proposed the idea that monotheistic religions began with Thutmose III's brother, Akhenaten, after he became pharaoh. One of his priests left Egypt with the message of a one true God. Then, after Akhenaten died and the Egyptians abolished the idea, the priests continued preaching about one God in the land of Israel. If this is true, it could be that Christianity, Judaism, and Islam all came from a rogue priest who fled Egypt 2,500 years ago. Thanks for watching! Be sure to stay tuned for extra content you might have missed. The origin of blue eyes. At Huacapuquiana in Peru, an ancient pre-Hispanic site occupied by the Lima culture between the years 200 and 700 AD, archaeologists discovered strange masks depicting humans with bright blue eyes. They don't know why these masks were made or who they were supposed to represent. Not a lot is known about them at all, but the fact that they have blue eyes has left researchers scratching their heads for decades. Nobody in the Americas should have had blue eyes prior to the Europeans. The masks have led some fringe scientists to speculate there could have been European visitors in Peru long before the Spanish arrived with their fleets of warships. But where in the world did blue eyes even come from? This itself is an ancient mystery that scientists have been trying to unravel with moderate success. Recent studies from the University of Copenhagen's Institute of Forensic Genetics suggest everyone with blue eyes descended from a single ancestor. This single ancestor lived sometime between 6,000 and 10,000 years ago, near the Black Sea in Russia. Scientists reached this conclusion by looking at 155 people from different countries with blue eyes. They took people from Denmark, Turkey, Jordan, other nations, and compared their unique genetic makeup. They also looked at the chromosomes in the irises of their eyes. But how blue eyes made it across the world and where these people may have gone is still a mystery. Science says that one person during the last ice age was born with blue eyes, and this individual somehow spread the gene across the entire human race. Statues of bright blue eyes have been found in India, Peru, and even ancient Sumer. And yet in modern times, it's difficult to find a single person in any of these places with blue eyes. Snake pits. Legend has it that Ragnar Lodbrok, the father of the great heathen army of Vikings, was captured by King Ella of Northumbria and thrown into a pit of snakes, where he died drowning in serpents, with toxic venom coursing through his veins. But did this really happen? And for that matter, just how prevalent were these horrible snake pits on the British Isles? We hear countless tales of people being sentenced to die in these pits, and yet not a single piece of archaeological evidence has ever been found to suggest that snake pits were real. Attila the Hun allegedly killed the Burgundian king Gunnar by throwing him into one of these deadly pits, and it is said that while the king lay dying, covered in snake bites, he played his harp. Sadly, this is one of those bizarre historical mysteries that will likely never be solved. We will probably never know if Ragnar Lodbrok truly existed, or if he was just a figment of Scandinavian lore. But we'll also never know if Europeans really dug giant holes, filled them with snakes, and then threw people who misbehaved inside of them. It's possible, but highly unlikely. The Condemned Sorceress. The mystery of Walpurga Hausmannen is that nobody knows if she was a powerful sorceress or just the unfortunate victim of 16th century discrimination. Walpurga was an elderly widow in Germany back in the 1500s. She was accused of vampirism, murder, demonic fornication, heresy, and even cannibalism. But even all these years later, historians still wonder whether she was in league with evil spirits or just caught up in the fury of puritanical insanity. What we do know is that she lived as a respectable midwife for about 2 decades in a small Bavarian town called Dillingen. Then came the day she was accused of witchcraft. Nobody knows who started the rumor, but suspicion spread heavily after she failed her midwife duties by delivering several stillborn infants. The gossip wheel turned, and she soon found herself in prison. She was tortured and admitted to a long and terrifying history of witchcraft. Walpurga admitted to forming a bond with the devil 30 years earlier, in 1556. She was convinced by the demon to destroy her neighbors, kill their children, and ruin their livelihood. She admitted to having secret ointments that she used as a midwife to kill babies before they were born. She also admitted to using their hair and bones for her own spells. In the end, she was carted through town, ripped apart by a mob of crazy villagers, and then executed. To this day, no one knows if she really was a witch or if her shockingly detailed testimony had been a byproduct of painful torture. The Biblical Judge. Recent excavations in the south of Israel have yielded something truly mysterious. Archaeologists found a shard of pottery emblazoned with the name Jerubbaal. This is the same name of a biblical judge from the Book of Judges in the Old Testament. The name was inscribed in ink on the piece of ceramic about 3,100 years ago. This coincides directly with the dates in the Book of Judges. Nobody knows what else was written on the vessel because it was smashed to pieces. However, we do know the alphabet used to write the judge's name was developed about 900 years earlier. It was likely invented by merchants who were too old and lazy to learn Egyptian hieroglyphics, but still needed a system of writing to peddle their trade. It was the same script in which the Book of Judges was written. In the Book of Judges, Jerubbaal is a military leader and prophet who had great victories over the Midianites. Prior to his victories, he was asked by God to destroy an altar to the false Babylonian god Baal, and after he destroyed this altar, he was then commanded to put the false worshippers to death. In the Bible, he's basically a hero who smashes down false idols and smites the sinners. The mystery here is that because of this newly discovered shard, it's pretty clear Jerubbaal was a real person. And if his story was real, how many other stories from the Bible are real? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe before you leave for more videos like this. The mythical king of the Igbo. The Igbo are an ethnic group in Nigeria. They've lived in this part of northwestern Africa for about 6,000 years. And because they've been around for so long, there are a lot of subgroups within the population. But regardless which subgroup an Igbo person belongs to, they all believe in the same origin story. They believe that their lineage can be traced back to one ancient king by the name of Eri. This in itself isn't that bizarre, but listen to the rest. The legendary King Eri is also referred to by the Igbo people as a sky being, a god king with supernatural powers who gave life to the people so that they could prosper. Archaeological evidence has shown that there was likely a very powerful king 6,000 years ago who ruled all of northwestern Africa. But the legend of Eri has a lot of weird things in common with alien creation theories, and this is what makes it so mysterious. Legend has it that Eri came down from the sky. He was a powerful deity from another place who took it upon himself to create humans in the form of the Igbos. So, for many, the Igbo are either talking about aliens who came down to manifest human life, or it's the story of their ancient king seriously dramatized. Either way, it's definitely something to think about. The secrets of the Mummy of Mayhery. The Mummy of Mayhery was unwrapped in March of 1901. The first person to behold the face of the mummy after thousands of years of peaceful sleep was Georges Darcy. He was shocked when he took off the mummy's mask and beheld the strikingly handsome face of a young man. The mummy had been buried in Egypt's Valley of the Kings around 1388 BC. nearly 3,500 years ago, and yet he looked as though he had died only yesterday. Information in his tomb identified him as an Egyptian noble, alive during the reign of Pharaoh Thutmose IV. He was buried in the royal necropolis, and his name translates to Lion of the Battlefield. The other thing that shocked Georges was the mummy's skin. It was a dark, natural black color, totally unchanged by the process of mummification. He clearly wasn't of Egyptian descent, but must have been from Nubia to the south. In Nubia, modern-day Sudan, people had much darker skin than the Egyptians. It's worth noting the mummy was also wearing a wig of woolly hair that had been glued to his scalp. The reason the mummy looked so young and fresh was really because the mummification process had gone extraordinarily well. Plus, his dark skin helped make him look younger than the taut parchment white skin of other mummies. The real mystery is that nobody knows who this Nubian noble was. It's obvious from his tomb that he was important and at the top level of government. But it's strange because Nubians were not typically liked by the Egyptians, and definitely not buried in royal tombs. The best theory researchers have is that he was the son of the pharaoh, birthed by one of his Nubian concubines living in his harem. The Sahama Lines. The Sahama Lines in Bolivia are a lot like the Nazca Lines in Peru, only there's not a lot of people who know they even exist. We only know they're there because of satellite images taken over western Bolivia's Altiplano Plateau, a barren and desert wasteland. Cutting across the dirt are thousands of extraordinarily straight lines that seem to serve no logical purpose. These roads crisscross each other, each one is perfectly straight, and none of them seem to lead anywhere. They stretch on for miles, making up a network of ancient pathways carved straight into the desert sand. So, why are the lines here? Some researchers call them geoglyphs. Others say they were used as roadways. The only consensus is that they were definitely etched into the earth by the indigenous people of Bolivia's desert 3,000 years ago. Each line is anywhere between 3 and 10 feet wide. Straight lines like this are seemingly impossible without modern technology. In total, they cover roughly 10,000 miles of terrain. It's been called the largest work of art in the world, made by scraping away the surface of oxidized rock to reveal the lighter surface beneath the desert. It would have taken decades, hundreds of people, and some serious determination. But as of right now, not a single scientist has any confirmation as to what the Sahama Lines were used for. One of the more bizarre theories is that these used to be landing tracks for alien vessels. But there's no proof of that either. Sick Neanderthals. Up until recently, it was believed that Neanderthals went extinct because of infectious diseases brought about by the explosion of agriculture 8,000 years ago. New research says this was not the case. Instead, it looks like human beings wiped out their Neanderthal competitors by passing on diseases that they had no resistance to. In other words, human beings made Neanderthals go extinct by making them sick. Specifically, it was the same bacteria that causes stomach ulcers, herpes, tuberculosis, and tapeworms that likely wiped out the Neanderthals. The new information was published by researchers at Cambridge and Oxford Brookes universities. They believe that the human hunter-gatherers who wandered into Europe were exposed to these bacteria and developed a resistance to them. But when the Neanderthals came out of Africa, following the humans and migrating into Eurasia, they didn't have the same kind of immune support. When the humans and the Neanderthals interacted, the humans inadvertently passed the diseases on. Exposure to this new pathogen spread like a plague. Just like how when Europeans went to the Americas and passed on their diseases, the same thing happened with the Homo sapiens and the Neanderthals. As of right now, this is just a theory. The mystery of why the Neanderthals went extinct still hasn't been solved. This is just the newest idea cycling through scientific circle, so I thought I'd let you know. The elephant slabs. The elephant slabs were discovered in a group of Native American ruins in New Mexico near Florida Vista back in 1910. In total, there are 2 slabs. Both are covered in strange writings that are difficult to decipher. The slabs are mysterious for many reasons. First of all, some historians like Brad Steiger have suggested the writing is a kind of Phoenician script, which would suggest people from Mesopotamia were in America about 1,000 years ago. Others believe the writings are actually Native American pictographs, primitive pictures used by the ancient people to tell a story. But what's bizarre is the fact that there are elephants among the pictures, along with images of birds. This has suggested that the Native Americans were living amongst elephants. In other words, there were elephants wandering across New Mexico as recently as 1310. But nobody really knows the truth. And to make matters even more complicated, some experts believe the elephant slabs were written in the ancient Vai script of the Malian people of Africa. This script on the stones has even been interpreted to match the ancient African language, and the translation does make sense. It basically says the desert is hot, there are a lot of birds, the elephants are sick, and the game is lean. In conclusion, the elephant slabs describe elephants living in New Mexico, and they may have been created by a group of Africans who somehow sailed to America hundreds of years before the Europeans. What do you think? Is this possible? Let me know in the comments below. The Bat Creek Stone. The Bat Creek Stone was excavated in 1889 from a burial mound in eastern Tennessee. It was done as part of a professional excavation carried out by the Smithsonian's Mound Survey Project. The director of this project, Cyrus Thomas, proclaimed the stone the first evidence of the Cherokee alphabet. The stone was put in storage and forgotten about for nearly 100 years. In the 1960s, researchers Henriette Mertz and Corey Ayub investigated the inscription and decided it wasn't from a Cherokee alphabet at all, but ancient Semitic. Modern language experts have identified the markings on the rock as Paleo-Hebrew, a language used in the 2nd century AD. These experts have even translated what the stone says. Hebrew scholar and archaeologist Robert Stieglitz in 1976 translated the letters on the stone as only for the Judeans. This is obviously a huge problem. 2,000 years ago, there was no way anyone from Judea in modern-day Israel had crossed all of Europe, gotten on a boat, and sailed to Tennessee. This is not something that would have happened. Nonetheless, 40 miles from Knoxville, in a burial mound, a Hebrew stone was discovered. It's currently on display at the McClung Museum of the University of Tennessee, and its origins are just as mysterious now, maybe even more, as when it was found in the 1800s.
The terrible Bennington Triangle. The Bennington Triangle is an area of southwestern Vermont in which a number of people vanished between the years of 1945 and 1950. To this day, no one really knows what happened to the 5 people who disappeared. Among the mysteriously vanished are Middle Rivers in 1945, Paula Weldon in 1946, James Tedford in 1949, and Paul Jeffson and Frida Langer in 1950. While it's true that there are plenty of disappearances that are never solved, the fact that all 5 of them vanished in the same region and were never found is beyond coincidence. Middle Rivers disappeared while on a hunting trip. He was guiding a group of hunters when he got a little bit ahead of them and was never seen again. People searched high and low, but the only thing that they found was a single rifle cartridge sitting in a stream. About a year later, Paula Weldon set out for a hike. She was seen by an elderly couple about 100 yards behind her, but after she went around a corner in the trail, she seemingly vanished into thin air. A $5,000 reward was put forth by the FBI, but not a single scrap of evidence was ever discovered. James Tedford was the 3rd one to disappear, approximately 3 years after Paula vanished. He was visiting relatives and then went to catch a local bus home. Witnesses saw him get on the bus, but somewhere on his way to Bennington, he disappeared. His belongings were still on the luggage rack when the bus driver stopped to search the bus. James had also seemingly vanished into thin air. The stories of the missing continue in this vein, with the disappearance of 8-year-old Paul Jeffson, who was alone in his mother's truck for an hour before he vanished. Frida Langer disappeared just 16 days after Paul. Langer, who was 53, went missing while on a camping trip. Her body, unlike the others, was eventually found. The body on Somerton Beach. In Adelaide, South Australia, a body was discovered on the beach in December of 1948. To this day, nobody knows who this person was, how he died, or where he came from. All we know is that his body turned up on Somerton Beach at about 7 o'clock in the evening on a Tuesday. A couple was strolling down the beach when they found the dead man, his head propped against a seawall, legs outstretched and motionless. He was dressed in a suit, he had new shoes on, and the couple just assumed he was asleep. This was despite the fact that his face was swarmed by bugs. It wasn't until the following morning that people realized the man leaning against the seawall was dead. He was transported to the nearest hospital, and the doctors put his time of death at somewhere around 2 o'clock in the morning. This means that when the people saw him at the beach the night before, he was still alive. Doctors believe he died from heart failure, brought on by some kind of poison. In his pockets, doctors found a pack of gum, some matches, cigarettes, no cash, and no ID. His clothes didn't even have tags on them. They had all been neatly snipped off. One of his trouser pockets had been repaired with orange thread, which doctors said they found very unusual. In his belly, doctors discovered his last meal and a quantity of blood. Everything pointed to poisoning, but there were some other strange things too, such as the fact that he was built like an athlete or bodybuilder, a physique which in the 1940s was very strange. In the end, the police could not figure out how he had gotten to the beach. They didn't even know if he was Australian, and over 70 years later, he's remained nameless. Mystery of the Cecil Hotel. The Cecil Hotel has been operating in Los Angeles for just about 100 years. During their century of business, they have developed a rather grisly reputation, as the Cecil Hotel has been marked by death. The Cecil Hotel rose to fame in 2013 because of the disappearance of Eliza Lamb, the Canadian college student who vanished and whose case was never really solved. For those unfamiliar with the case, Eliza was seen on surveillance video in an elevator in the hotel, acting extremely strange. She vanished without a trace and was later discovered naked in the water tank on the hotel roof. To this day, nobody has any clue what happened to her, or even really what she was doing in Los Angeles. But Eliza Lamb was only the most recent victim of the hotel. The first death here took place 2 years after it opened, and in the 1960s a retired woman was discovered dead in her room after being assaulted and stabbed. Her murder was also never solved. In 1985, the serial killer Richard Ramirez was a resident of the hotel. While not proven, it's believed that Ramirez, known largely as the Night Stalker, committed several of his crimes while staying at the hotel. The moral of the story here is that even though Eliza is the most famous unsolved disappearance of the Cecil Hotel, this place has a long and disturbing history of deaths and vanishings. So much so that it has been the inspiration for numerous horror films and TV shows, including American Horror Story Hotel in 2015, the bombing of Wall Street in 1920. Wall Street was bombed on September 16, 1920. Up until the devastating attacks of 9/11, this was the worst terrorist attack on US soil. 101 years later, the truth about who bombed Wall Street is still a total mystery. Here's how the bombing went down. The lunch rush had just started. There was a nondescript man driving a horse and cart up the street in front of the USSA office and across from the JP Morgan building. The driver got off the cart and walked innocently into the crowd of businessmen and other city folk going about their business and heading away for lunch. Minutes later, the cart exploded in a massive boil of fire and metal fragments, killing over 30 people and injuring roughly 300. It was a massive disaster with horrific carnage. But who is responsible? Sadly, we don't know, and probably never will. Everyone assumed it was an act of intentional terrorism, likely by an Italian anarchist group. But because this was the 1920s, there wasn't really any way to collect forensic evidence. Crews cleaned up the damage through the night, taking away anything that could have been used to identify the perpetrator. By the next morning, Wall Street was bustling, as if nothing had happened, except that some of the workers were bandaged up, and life carried on. Who caused this devastating explosion? To this day, it is still a mystery. The death of JonBenet Ramsey. On the morning after Christmas 1996, 6-year-old JonBenet Ramsey was found dead. The young girl's parents had actually thought she was kidnapped during the night. Her mother, Patsy Ramsey, called 911 just before 6 o'clock in the morning, saying that she had found a ransom note at the bottom of her stairs. The note said that if the parents phoned the authorities, the young girl would be killed. They were asking for approximately $118,000. The note also said that the parents would be receiving a phone call from the kidnapper in the morning. Naturally, the parents did not listen to the demand letter and instead called the police. But a lot of things happened in those first few hours, such as friends of the family coming for moral support and contaminating the entire house. The police didn't secure the scene at all, and after a few hours, most of the police just simply left. And then things got bad. John Ramsey, the girl's father, went to look in the basement for any potential clues when he found JonBenét's dead body down there. She hadn't been kidnapped at all. She had been dead in the basement the whole time. She had her hands tied over her head, tape over her mouth, and she wasn't breathing. The cause of death turned out to be strangulation with a string wrapped around a piece from a paintbrush. The child also suffered a massive skull fracture and shocks from a stun gun. It was horrific, and sadly, the police believed the parents were involved. But this could never be proven, and all these years later we still have no idea who killed the girl or how they got in and out of the basement while committing a murder without being noticed. What do you think happened here? Was the father responsible for his daughter's death, or was this a bizarre case of kidnapping gone wrong? Let me know your theories in the comments, and don't forget to hit subscribe. The Twin Peaks murder. If anyone has ever seen the TV series Twin Peaks, you may be interested to know that the show was based on an unsolved homicide from 1908. It happened in New York, with 20-year-old Hazel Drew being brutally killed under dubious circumstances. Her body was discovered floating in a pond on July 11th, 4 days after she was killed. The more the investigators looked into the killing, the more confusing the whole case became. Drew was from a poor family but had been working as a domestic servant for 3 wealthy and important men in the city. These were connected people, politically speaking. 2 of them had run for mayor, and 1 of them was an engineer for the city. But just days before she died, Drew quit her job unexpectedly. It seemed like her murder may have had something to do with her work. But more weird stuff kept coming out. The police discovered letters sent to her from various male friends. One of these friends even apologized in the letter he wrote for bruising her wrists. It also turned out she had been in a violent altercation with another boyfriend named Henry. But in the end, there were too many suspects and too many contradictions. Police were never able to make an arrest or solve the case of who murdered Hazel Drew. The Hinterkaifeck murders. In the case of the Hinterkaifeck murders, over 100 suspects have been interviewed, and yet an official suspect has never been named, even after nearly a century of investigating. The murders happened in March of 1922. Farmer Andreas Gruber noticed footsteps outside his home leading from the woods to his place, but not going back. It was chilling, to say the least. This was 1922 in rural Germany. Things were quiet and safe, but not for Andreas Gruber and his family. Somebody had snuck onto his property, and on March 31st, this unidentified person, or even persons, lured each family member outside to their death. Andreas, his wife Ccile, his daughters Victoria and his granddaughter Ccile were lured one by one to the barn outside and slaughtered with a pickaxe. The family maid and Andreas's grandson Josef were massacred in the home where they slept in their beds. It wouldn't be until April 4th, nearly a week later, that a group of townspeople stopped by the farm to see why the kids hadn't showed up for school in a few days. Nobody ever found out who murdered this entire family. The Munich police interviewed suspects as recently as 1986, but frustratingly, no culprit has been captured. The only reason we know about the footprints is that Andreas had complained to his neighbor about them. He had even complained about hearing footsteps in the attic. He also said that the keys to the tool shed were missing, and that he found a newspaper inside his house that none of his family members had purchased. The Christmas tree sinking. Just about 11 decades ago, the Christmas tree ship sank in Lake Michigan. The schooner was captained by a guy nicknamed Captain Santa. It had been filled with a cargo of Christmas trees on its way to Chicago, but met a horrifying storm while moving across the lake. In the final moments that the ship was still upright, the crew threw out the port anchor, hoping that it would help combat the wind. This is what archaeologists found when they investigated the shipwreck. But there is still a mystery about how the ship sank. According to the National Archives, a powerboat saw the ship in distress and went to intercept, but when they reached the approximate location of the ship, it had completely vanished. For decades, nobody could figure out what happened in such a short time for the entire ship to go beneath the waves. It was as if the water just opened up and swallowed it. Archaeologists later decided that the ship had been carrying too many Christmas trees. When the crew threw the anchor, it caused a chain reaction that yanked the vessel down to the bottom of the lake so hard that it crashed into the lake bed like a freight train. But that's just what the archaeologists theorize. The truth is that 16 people died within seconds when the ship plunged into the ocean. Something happened on the ship that night to cause utter chaos, and we may never know exactly what it was. The murder of Juan Prim. Juan Prim may have been strangled to death. He was a statesman who became the Prime Minister of Spain for a very brief bit of time. On December 28, 1870, a group ambushed and shot the Prime Minister. He was wounded but still alive, thanks to the carriage driver, who managed to continue on despite the ambush and get the injured Juan Prim to his house. Some accounts say he was so minorly injured that he walked into his house himself. Even when doctors came to operate, it didn't seem like he was in danger of dying. Yet 2 days later, the situation suddenly turned terrible. He fell into a delirium, and he died at 8:30. The cause of death was labeled sepsis, an infection caused by the projectile from the gun that ripped into him. But here's the bit that led to theories about strangulation. A new autopsy done in 2012 revealed that the real cause of death could have been, well, strangulation. This would mean that he survived the initial assassination attempt and then was strangled to death by someone in his inner circle. But this was 150 years ago, and we'll probably never be able to know for certain. Mystery mob killing. Nobody knows who killed Benjamin Ccile. To his friends, he was Bugsy Ccile, an infamous mobster who was shot to death on June 20th, 1947. It happened in Southern California just 6 months after he opened the Flamingo Hotel and Casino with other mob affiliates in Las Vegas. The Flamingo is still open today at the exact same site, though there have been some serious refurbishments since the 1940s. Benjamin Ccile was staying at his girlfriend's house in Beverly Hills on the night of his death. It was about 10:45 at night, and a sniper armed with a military combine shot Benjamin through the window of the living room. At the time, Benjamin was reading the newspaper. He never even knew he was killed. 2 bullets went through his head and 2 went through his chest. One of the headshots was so intense that it blew his eye out, and it landed 15 feet away in the dining room. There's been a lot of speculation throughout the past 70-odd years as to who hired the hitman. Some say it was his childhood friend, Lansky, another mobster. It may have been that Benjamin had upset Lansky by constructing the Flamingo Casino. When the casino opened, there was a freak winter storm in Nevada. This caused a less than great opening, meaning some people may have lost some money and got very angry. But in the end, his assassin was never caught. Do you think any of these unsolved mysteries will ever be cleared? Let me know any theories you might have in the comments, and thanks for watching. If you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button for more awesome videos from the channel.